Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily for Tuesday, June 28th, 1692. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. Today, the court of Oyer and Terminer met again at the Salem townhouse, and the case today was all against Sarah Good. The grand jury returned 3 indictments against her. The trial jury heard evidence, and by the end, she was convicted of witchcraft. She would be among the first people condemned under this court.
The 3 indictments each charge her with afflicting a specific person. The first named Sarah Bibber and pointed to the 2nd of May. The second named Elizabeth Hubbard and reached back to the 1st of March. And the third named Ann Putnam Jr., also from the 1st of March.
Each one accused her of using, quote, certain detestable arts called witchcrafts and sorceries, by which the named person was, in the language of the documents, tortured, afflicted, pined, consumed, wasted, and tormented. The grand jury endorsed each indictment as a true bill.
A list of witnesses against Sarah was drawn up, and it gathers names we have followed all spring. William Allen, John Hughes, Samuel Braybrook, Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis, Sarah Bibber, Abigail Williams, Elizabeth Hubbard, Ann Putnam Jr., Richard Patch, and Tituba. Several of those people gave or owned prior testimony on this very day.
The testimony fell into a few distinct kinds, and together it shows the range of evidence the court was willing to weigh. There was spectral testimony, the claim that Good's apparition did the harm.
Sarah Bibber, aged about 36, swore that on the Saturday night before a suspected woman from Reading was examined, she saw the apparition of Sarah Good standing by her bedside. According to Bibber, the specter pulled aside the curtain, turned down the sheet, and looked upon her child of about 4 years old, and the child was struck with a violent fit that she and her husband could hardly hold the child.
Bibber gave a second fuller deposition tied to the 2nd of May, in which she described the apparition of Sarah Good pressing the breath almost out of her body and afflicting her child so dreadfully that it twisted out of its own father's arms. He added that she believed upon her oath that Sarah Good had bewitched her.
Then there was testimony about physical disturbance. William Batten, aged about 76, together with William Shaw and his wife Deborah, testified that a week earlier Susanna Sheldon had been at the Shaw house with her hands tied across in such a way that they had to cut the string to free her. They said she had been bound in that manner 4 times in 2 weeks, and that whenever she so much as touched the string, she was bit.
They further described a broom carried out of the house invisibly and set in an apple tree, a shirt carried off, and a milk tub carried 3 poles into the woods.
And there was the oldest kind of accusation, the charge of harm to livestock and property. Sarah Gage, aged about 40, testified that some 2.5 years earlier, Sarah Good came to her house and was refused entry because Gage feared Good had been among people with smallpox. Good fell to muttering and scolding and warned that if she were not let in, she would give her something.
The next morning, one of Gage's cows died in a sudden, terrible, and strange manner, and some of the neighbors and the deponent took it to be witchcraft. Thomas Gage, her husband, added that the cow died about that time, and that when he and some neighbors opened the animal, they could find no natural cause of its death. So that was a cow autopsy.
Cow autopsy, yes. And one further deposition from a person named in the document as Johanna Childen, who's believed could possibly be a reference with sloppy handwriting to Susanna Sheldon. This Johanna Childen, whether she was her own person or was Susanna, she described the apparition of Sarah Good and her dead child, with the child declaring that its mother had murdered it. That's Sarah Good's dead child who had passed in the Boston jail in 1692. And that is striking, but it appears to have been used neither at the grand jury nor at the trial. The body of evidence that did its work was the spectral testimony, the bound hands and vanishing objects, and the dead cattle.
Today also gave 2 documents where the accused and their families did push back. The first is the petition of Rebecca Nurse, addressed to the court of Oyer and Terminer.
When a group of women had earlier searched her body for a supernatural mark, one of them, whom Nurse describes as the most ancient, skillful, and prudent of them all, disagreed with the rest and declared that she saw nothing on Nurse but what might come from a natural cause. Nurse then explained that natural cause herself, attributing the condition to bodily weakness arising in part from the difficulties of her many childbirths.
She petitions the court to admit a new group of women to examine her before she is brought to trial, naming Mrs. Higgins Sr., Mrs. Buckstone, Mrs. Woodbury, two of the midwives, and Mrs. Porter, women she calls the most grave, wise, and skillful.
The petition was one of the very few instruments an accused person actually had in their defense. She had no defense counsel, but she could put her name to a document and challenge the physical evidence against her by demanding it be reviewed by people qualified to read it. She writes that her life lies now in their hands under God, and that conscious of her own innocence, she begs the liberty to make it known to the world.
The second document is a statement made on behalf of Elizabeth Howe, James Howe Sr. of Ipswich, the father of Elizabeth's husband and aged about 94, gave a statement in support.
James Howe Sr.'s wife was Elizabeth Dane, the sister of the Reverend Francis Dane, the longtime minister of Andover. That makes the accused woman, Elizabeth Howe, the niece by marriage of Reverend Dane and the wife of his nephew, James Howe Jr.
The colony was preparing to hang the wife of a minister's own nephew, a woman married directly into the family of the pastor of Andover, and that connection to the ministry did nothing to protect Elizabeth.
James Howe Sr. had lived near Elizabeth for about 30 years, and he testified that in all that time she had carried herself well, as a daughter, as a wife, and in every relation as becomes a Christian.
He describes her as a wife to his son who was, quote, very careful, loving, obedient, and kind. And then he adds that his son had lost his sight, and that Elizabeth, quote, considering his want of eyesight, was tenderly leading him about the hand.
He closes by asking the judges for one thing. He says he is desiring God may guide your honors to see a difference between prejudice and conscience.
The Elizabeth Howe case continued to build, with Isaac Cummings Jr. testifying against her, alongside the depositions from his parents we covered yesterday. Clerk Stephen Sewell issued fresh summonses for witnesses against John Willard and Martha Carrier, pointing the court towards its next targets.
There were new arrests as well. Mary Bradbury of Salisbury was arrested on witchcraft charges. She was a woman of standing, the wife of a militia captain, and connected by marriage to a remarkable web of accused families, including the Nurses, Bishops, Estes, Wilds, and Cloyses.
A constable also arrested Sarah Davis. And in Connecticut, the Stanford case ground on, with Katherine Branch naming Elizabeth Clawson during questioning and reporting nighttime affliction by the specters of Mercy Disborough, Goody Miller, Mary Staples, and Elizabeth Clawson.
On the 28th of June, the court convicted Sarah Good through spectral visions, dead cattle, and bound hands, while Rebecca Nurse petitioned for a fair examination and James Howe Sr. gave his account of Elizabeth Howe.